On a freezing winter night, a white billionaire asked his driver to stop by a dark alley. Stepping out of his sleek black car, he saw 5 young black boys huddled around a smoldering barrel, their breath curling in the icy air. Instead of walking away, he offered them a warm meal and shelter, just one night out of the cold. But as they followed him into his towering glass high-rise, none of them knew this small gesture would forever change all their lives. I love knowing where my viewers are from. Let's get into the story. The envelope sat like a quiet storm on the vast expanse of polished walnut, its faded manila edges catching the dying amber light that filtered through the sprawling floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse. The sky beyond was a dense quilt of winter gray, swallowing the edges of the Chicago skyline in a haze of oncoming snow. Inside, the air was unnaturally still, heavy with the sterile scent of wealth. Citrus wax from the wooden floors, leather polished from the bespoke armchairs, and the faint chilling sterility of a room that had never heard laughter echo off its marble walls. Gregory Langston sat behind the desk, still as a portrait, his fingers laced beneath his chin, the envelope untouched, yet not unread. The words had already burrowed into his bones like frost through old brick. 3 months, he murmured, barely above a breath, yet the sound seemed to echo across the cavernous space, bouncing off the cold surfaces as if the room itself refused to accept it. The voice that once commanded mergers and dictated billion-dollar moves in boardrooms across continents now sounded paper-thin, fraying at the edges like old silk. 3 left? He repeated, not to confirm, but to witness. The city twinkled below like a field of broken stars. But where others might have seen beauty, Gregory saw distance. Those thousands of tiny lights represented lives, families, warmth, movement, connection. Things he had traded piece by piece for power, until all that remained was this towering cathedral of solitude and glass, echoing with silence too vast to bear. His hand reached for the crystal decanter as if by memory rather than thought. The cork slipped out with a muffled pop, and the 30-year-old Glenrothes splashed into his glass with a soft glug, catching the faint gold of dusk as it swirled into place. He raised it to his lips, but the taste was off, hollow, like drinking fire doused in ash. His tongue recoiled, not from the burn, but from the emptiness. Across the room, the oil portrait of Lena, his late wife, watched him with unmoving eyes. The space beside her frame was empty, reserved perhaps for a child they never had, a legacy never built beyond profit margins and strategic partnerships. He had told himself for decades there'd be time, after the next quarter, after the next milestone, but time, it seemed, had collected its final debt. The leather chair groaned faintly as he stood, every sound amplified in the vast hush of the room. As he approached the window, the light dimmed to indigo, and snow began to fall, first in gentle flurries, then in waves, brushing against the glass like soft fingers trying to reach in. Far below, headlights flickered through slush-lined streets. People scurried like shadows across crosswalks, some holding hands, some hunched under umbrellas, all of them heading to somewhere. His chest tightened, not with fear, not even regret, but with an old ache. Something sharp and ancient, buried under board reports and quarterly projections. Loneliness. The kind that doesn't shout but waits in silence until you're too tired to ignore it. He had once shared a bunk bed in a 1-bedroom walk-up with his mother, who worked 3 jobs to keep heat in the radiators. He remembered the humming of the space heater, the smell of burnt toast and hand-me-down winter coats. He remembered vowing never to need anyone again. And he had succeeded, spectacularly so. The chime of his phone was abrupt, almost violent against the stillness. A board meeting, a market alert, another billion to shepherd toward nowhere. He silenced it, slowly, deliberately, and then, like something primitive and irrational had risen from the cold pit of his gut, Gregory Langston made a decision. Quiet, private, but seismic. He adjusted his tie, stiffened his spine, and stepped into the elevator, his reflection staring back at him in the mirrored walls like a stranger behind tinted glass. The polished chrome doors closed with a hiss, swallowing the silence of the room and everything he had once believed mattered. Later. The black limousine threaded through the wet, narrow arteries of downtown, its headlights casting slanted beams through the early snow. The driver, Dell, murmured something about road closures. Gregory barely heard. His mind was still in that office, in that envelope, in the echo of his own whisper. 3 months. Then came a flickering movement in an alley beside a boarded-up pawn shop and a half-collapsed brick church. Without thinking, Gregory leaned forward. "Dell, that's stop. Now." "Sir?" I said, "Stop the car." He stepped out into the street's frozen breath, the wind cutting clean through his tailored coat like it had been designed to punish softness. His shoes, crafted in Florence, crunched against gravel, ice, and broken glass as he moved toward the alley. The shadows stirred. He counted them. 5. 5 figures under layers of patchwork blankets and the flicker of a dying oil drum fire. They straightened as he approached, like deer caught mid-slice, eyes wide, alert. "Don't come closer," the oldest warned, stepping forward with his arms slightly raised, not in surrender but in readiness. "I'm not police," Gregory said, palms up. The boy's face was sharp, guarded, maybe 15. His jacket was army surplus, 2 sizes too big. "We're allowed here. The church said we could stay till they start tearing it down." Gregory's gaze swept the space. Despite the cold, despite the fear in their postures, it was organized. Belongings wrapped and placed together, layers shared, shoes lined. There was logic here, brotherhood. One of the younger boys, no more than 7, peeked from behind the tallest, his eyes round and silent. "What are your names?" Gregory asked. They hesitated. "Cairo," the oldest said finally. "Micah and Zane," he added, motioning to 2 similar builds behind him. "That's Omari, and the kid's Noel. Others. A necessity." The words were quiet, but they thundered in Gregory's chest. The snow began to fall harder, swirling around them like ash from a dying world. He swallowed hard. "I live 5 blocks from here," he said. "Warm beds, food, just for tonight." Cairo narrowed his eyes. "What's the catch?" "There isn't one." The boys gathered close, whispering, the wind snatching fragments of their suspicion. Finally, Cairo turned back. "We go together. We leave when we want." Gregory nodded. "Deal." And just like that, the elevator doors to Gregory Langston's penthouse opened again, but this time they swallowed something else entirely. 5 wary boys wrapped in second-hand coats, dragging their stories behind them like ghosts. Their eyes drank in the marble floors, the walls without fingerprints, the chandelier that glowed like a sun they hadn't seen in years. They stood clustered at the threshold, out of place, uncertain, half prepared to bolt. "The kitchen's over there," Gregory said gently. "Room's down that hole. You'll find what you need." He turned to leave. Then a quiet voice. "Why are you doing this?" Noel, the smallest one, the one whose eyes had never stopped watching. Gregory paused, his hand resting on the doorframe. He could have said a dozen things. None would have been honest. "Because I can," he said. Later, he sat alone in his study, surrounded by mahogany and silence. But this time the silence was different. Beneath it were sounds he hadn't heard in years. Footsteps. Soft laughter. Life. Somewhere in that warmth 5 boys had laid down their heads in real beds, perhaps for the first time in months. Gregory Langston leaned back in his chair, staring at the flames in the hearth, and made a call. "Harold," he said, "clear my schedule tomorrow morning." His voice was calm, clear. "Oh, something. It needs to be rewritten." The penthouse, once a cold cathedral of silence, had begun to hum with dissonant life. No longer did Gregory Langston awaken to the sterile whisper of nothingness. Now there were sounds, foreign, uninvited, yet impossibly vital. Footsteps padded unevenly down the long hallways. Microwave doors slammed. Someone spilled cereal across the marble floor at 6 a.m. and let out a panicked curse before scrambling to clean it with a monogrammed linen napkin. The house, his house, was becoming a thing alive, breathing in chaos and exhaling fragments of boyhood he had never known. Still, every change came with friction. Kyra was the first to challenge the warmth. He sat at the far end of the dining table each morning, arms crossed, eyes flicking from plate to face like a soldier mapping a battlefield. His voice was clipped, precise, as if every word might be weaponized against him. "You keep calling this home," he said one morning, pushing scrambled eggs across the plate without taking a bite. "But how long until we're back in the snow?" Gregory, seated at the head of the table, looked up from the financial pages of the Tribune. His fingers paused mid-turn. He met Cairo's eyes, not with rebuke, but something quieter. Recognition. "I don't give out shelter on loan," he said after a moment. "If I say you stay, you stay." But Cairo didn't nod. He didn't speak. His silence was a fortress, built from too many promises broken by too many suits, with kind eyes and expiration dates. What Gregory didn't yet know was that Cairo had once unpacked in a room with bunk beds and pastel walls, then been thrown back into the shelter system 3 months later, when a divorce shattered his last forever. He remembered that morning clearly, his toothbrush still wet when the door closed behind him. Irie found sanctuary in a quiet corner of the sunroom, where light spilled across canvas and paint tubes. One afternoon, Gregory returned from a doctor's consultation to find the 11-year-old crouched on the floor, staring in horror at a broken sculpture, the marble bust of a Roman senator that had sat undisturbed for over 20 years. Fragments lay like scattered teeth across the hardwood. "I'm sorry," Omari whispered, eyes rimmed with panic. "I didn't mean to. I was just trying to move the easel and I bumped the stand." Gregory stood in the doorway, fists tightening involuntarily. For a long moment the air between them was still and cold. "You should have asked someone," he said sharply. "You don't touch things you don't understand." Omari's lower lip trembled. "I was just painting." But Gregory was already walking away, the echo of his shoes hard and fast on the floorboards. That night, guilt hit him like a late storm. He knocked softly on the boy's door, cleared his throat at the threshold. "That bust," he said quietly, "meant nothing." He paused, then added, "But your work on the easel, that has a pulse." Omari said nothing. But the next day Gregory found a small canvas outside his study, a portrait of the broken bust with golden cracks running through it like veins of fire, rebuilt, reimagined, transcended. Micah and Zane were a different sort of energy, bright, kinetic, uncontainable. Their room looked more like a NASA lab than a bedroom. Circuit boards wired to wall outlets, dismantled drones lining the windowsills, blueprints scrawled across butcher paper taped to the floor. One evening, Gregory stepped in and found the two boys sitting cross-legged beneath their desk, laptops open, wires snaking between them like digital ivy. "What are you building?" he asked, arms folded. "An alert system for the hallway cams," Micah said without looking up. "To catch who?" Gregory raised an eyebrow. "Anyone not supposed to be here," Zane muttered. "Just in case." Gregory opened his mouth to question further but closed it. Just in case was the only kind of safety some children understood. Then there was Noel. The youngest had taken to trailing Gregory with quiet footsteps and a curious mind, asking questions that burrowed past surface pleasantries. "Do tumors hurt when they grow?" he asked one morning while watching Gregory wince over coffee. "What do cancer cells eat?" Another time, "Do you ever wish you were someone else, just for a day?" Gregory had no answers, but he found himself wanting to. He began leaving old medical journals out where Noel could find them, circling pages that explained in simple diagrams what his doctors had explained in cold jargon. The weeks passed, and somewhere between the morning arguments over music volume and the late-night sound of giggles bouncing down hallways that were once graveyards of sound, Gregory Langston made a decision that sent ripples across the marble floors. He wanted to keep them. Both 5. His lawyer nearly choked on her words when he brought it up. "Gregory, Guardianship? Adoption? This isn't a PR move. You're talking about making them heirs. You're talking about legacy. I know what I'm talking about, he replied, voice steel. Do you? She snapped. They're children. Strangers. You've known them for what, 6 weeks? Gregory looked out his window, where Cairo was helping Zane adjust the handlebars on a used bike they'd restored together. No, he said. They're not strangers. They're the only family I've got left. The winter sun fell weakly over the steel skyline as the days began to grow shorter, an omen perhaps of what stirred quietly beneath the surface of Gregory's world. On the outside, things looked almost idyllic. The penthouse was alive with energy. Cairo was loosening his guard, laughing more when he thought no one noticed. Omari's art now hung in the main hall, a canvas of bold colors where a taxidermy elk head used to rest. Micah and Zane had wired the entire west wing with motion-activated lights and temperature sensors, just for fun, and Noel had started annotating Gregory's prescriptions with sticky notes that explained every side effect in childlike handwriting and medical accuracy that startled his pharmacist. But in the shadows of Langston and Crest's boardroom, 12 blocks away and 50 stories below, a different kind of energy churned. Richard Thorne, chairman of the board and Gregory's longest-standing rival, watched the news feed of Gregory's guardianship filing with the kind of tight-jawed stillness that preceded storms. His fingers tapped in a rhythm on the mahogany desk. 1, 2, 3. He's lost his mind, Richard finally said aloud. He's putting the company's name on a circus of orphans. Angela Moore stood near the window, her reflection faint against the snowy skyline. She didn't answer at first. Her voice, when it came, was soft but cold. He's dying, Richard. You think the board will push back against a dying man playing savior? Richard turned slowly. I don't need to push back. I just need to prove he's no longer of sound mind to lead a $38 billion, 0-cents enterprise. Angela's silence lingered. Then, quietly, she slid a flash drive onto the desk. Gregory's medical scans, treatment options, private physician memos. 20 years of loyalty undone with the click of a mouse. Back at the penthouse, change was in the air, and Noel, ever perceptive, was the first to smell it. He noticed a camera feed flicker. One of the hallway cams showed a 30-second gap, as if time itself had glitched. Weird, he murmured, adjusting the playback software. The feed returned, but something in the timestamp was off. He brought it to Micah and Zane, who exchanged a glance before diving into their system logs. They're not just tapping us, Zane said grimly. Someone's been in our network. They pinged our external firewall, masked it as a Wi-Fi diagnostic. That's not random. Isa's fingers flew across the keys. They were looking for something specific, Gregory's med files. When they told him, Gregory's face paled, not in fear but recognition. His eyes closed briefly, then opened with a sharper clarity than he'd felt in weeks. Angela, he muttered. And suddenly, the warmth in the house turned cold again. Omari, listening from the staircase, bit his lip. He hadn't told anyone yet, but the night before he'd seen a man parked across the street for hours, smoking through the cracked window of a black sedan. The man hadn't moved once, not even to check his phone. They weren't just being watched, they were being dismantled. Gregory gathered them all in the study that evening, the fireplace crackling low behind him. His voice was calm, steady, but there was fire beneath the surface. Richard Thorne wants control of Langston and Crest, and Angela is helping him feed the board a story. That I'm no longer capable of running what I built. Cairo leaned forward. Because of us? Gregory didn't flinch. Because they think family weakens a man. But they're wrong. Micah's eyes lit with defiance. Then we fight. It wasn't bravado. It was decision. Over the following days, the penthouse transformed into something between a war room and a science fair. Zane mapped the board members' voting patterns, correlating stock movements with public statements. Micah built a server that scraped Thorne's historical trades, looking for anomalies. Omari began sketching timeline visuals, how press leaks coincided with anonymous company rumors. And Noel, diving into a rabbit hole of oncology journals, quietly began building something else. a database of global experimental trials Gregory might qualify for, cross-checked against his genomic profile. Gregory watched them, day by day, night by night, not as a father figure hovering to interfere, but as a man in awe of something he'd never expected to witness again. Purpose blooming in the margins. He had once built an empire with men in suits and Harvard degrees. Now he was building something greater, with boys who had nothing but each other, a few laptops, and an unshakable belief that loyalty wasn't a relic. As the first snow blanketed the city below, the penthouse stood like a lantern against the night. But within its walls, a different kind of storm was coming, one that would soon test the strength of everything they had become. The wind howled outside like a warning no one could ignore, curling against the cold glass windows of the penthouse as if trying to find a way inside. Gregory sat in the high-backed leather chair by the fire, the heat licking gently at his knees, but the chill that crept through him wasn't from the winter storm. It was the slow, bone-deep dread of time running out. Time he'd squandered for decades chasing silence and gold, now suddenly too precious to spend sitting still. Noel shuffled in, holding a digital tablet with both hands like it was a sacred relic. His curls were still damp from a shower, but his eyes carried something sharper than any child should ever have to wear, a gravity far beyond his age. "I found something," he said, voice small but unwavering. "There's a clinical trial, unlisted but real. Pancreatic carcinoma, type D variant. It uses hyper-personalized mRNA targeting, adjusted for mutational drift." But he hesitated, then swallowed. "You'd have to leave the country." Gregory didn't speak for a long while. The fire cracked. Somewhere behind them the elevator pinged softly as it reset to the lobby floor. Finally his voice broke the quiet. "If it works, will I see another year?" Noel nodded. "If your body responds, maybe more." Gregory looked at him. Not at his face, but at his stance, the way he gripped the tablet like a doctor might hold a defibrillator. It wasn't just a suggestion. It was a call to live. He leaned forward. "Then we begin. Right now." And so they did. What followed was not a battle. It was a campaign. Methodical, daring, stitched with data, courage, and a kind of love none of them yet had the vocabulary to name. Noel began coordinating directly with Dr. Bowden in Geneva, using encrypted video calls and flagged imaging updates. Gregory signed the waivers with a steady hand. He was going to fight, but not alone. He called Cairo into his study the next morning, the room filled with the scent of cedarwood polish and bitter coffee. "I need you to carry something," he said, sliding a folder across the desk. Inside, notarized documents, corporate authority transfers, a legal affidavit naming Cairo Langston the temporary acting proxy of his voting shares. Cairo's brow furrowed. "You want me to go to war with your board?" Gregory didn't blink. "No. I want you to show them who you already are." Elsewhere in the penthouse, the twins had repurposed Gregory's indoor lap pool into a data lab. Fiber cables trailed across marble-like vines. Blinking routers stood like glowing stones in the corners. Their fingers danced over keyboards like piano prodigies possessed. Together, they had built an artificial intelligence model, Creston AI. Named half in jest and half in rebellion, it could forecast market turbulence with eerie precision, and when they cross-tested it against Langston and Crest's trading desk, it outperformed by 38% over 48 hours. They grinned when they saw the results. "Let 'em say we're just street kids now," Zane muttered. Omari, meanwhile, was crafting a different weapon. In the dim quiet of the media room he composed a visual dossier, part exposé, part narrative arc outlining Richard Thorne's internal manipulations, offshore holdings, and the subtle shifts in company policy that enriched a private fund tied to Thorne's cousin's name. He didn't just show numbers, he painted a story, a trail of greed dressed in suits and boardroom silence. Days passed like heartbeats. Gregory began treatment in private, enduring sleepless nights filled with nausea, fever, and long, aching hours watching the ceiling. But he never closed his door, never pushed them away. One night, after a particularly brutal round, he awoke to find Noel curled up on a blanket near the bed, a stethoscope resting beside his cheek. Zane was snoring faintly on the sofa, laptop still glowing in his lap. Omari had left a sketch on the nightstand. 5 boys beneath a golden lantern, their faces upturned. Cairo stood leaning by the doorway, arms crossed, watching over the room like a silent sentinel. Gregory didn't cry. But something warm and unfamiliar bloomed beneath his ribs, fighting the illness in a way medicine never could. In that moment he understood. He wasn't just building a defense, he was becoming part of something finally worth defending. And the phoenix, fragile, untested, still smoldering, began to rise. The boardroom on the 52nd floor had never known such a hush. Not in decades. Not even during market crashes or internal power struggles. Now, under the soft hum of recessed lighting and the steely glint of brushed aluminum walls, a different kind of reckoning unfolded. The long table gleamed like a polished blade, reflecting faces once smug, now twitching with restrained discomfort. Gregory Langston walked in slowly, not with the shuffling gait of a dying man, but the deliberate, grounded stride of someone who had tasted death, spoken to it, and sent it on its way. His presence was quiet but seismic. He wore no tie, just a slate-gray wool suit and a lapel pin shaped like a flame. A cane hung lightly from one hand, though he didn't lean on it. Behind him entered Cairo, taller now, posture sharpened by purpose, dressed in a navy blazer and dark jeans, his eyes scanning the room not with fear but with ownership. Thorne tried to rise, but Gregory's gaze, cold, precise, froze him midway. "Don't bother, Richard. You'll be standing soon enough." At the end of the room, Omari clicked play. The projector activated with a low buzz, washing the wall in white. A series of cascading visuals followed. Spreadsheets, offshore shell companies, falsified market reports, wire transfers, and surveillance images, some in color, others grainy but damning. Omari's voice guided the presentation like a slow burn, each phrase crisp, unflinching. Here, Richard initiates a transaction disguising loss reallocation as asset depreciation. Here, he authorizes a private fund transfer under a dummy executive. Here, he violates SEC reporting obligations by over 30 days. Whispers broke out among the directors. One woman gasped. Thorne shifted in his seat, sweat beading along his temple. Micah and Zane sat just outside the door, watching the live financial dashboard update in real time. Their AI system had just flagged 2 more predictive spikes in Langston and Kress performance, proof not only of recovery, but evolution. A future reshaped by intelligence born in a penthouse living room, not a Wall Street think tank. When the lights came up, the room fell into a tense silence broken only by Gregory's voice, soft but ironclad. You mistook compassion for incompetence. You mistook legacy for weakness. That ends today. Thorne was dismissed before the end of the hour. By sundown, federal auditors were waiting at his townhouse in Evanston. A year passed like a quiet bloom under fresh light. The skies over Chicago remained restless, gray one day, golden the next, but inside what was once an empty lot in South Side, something permanent had taken root. Lantern House stood 3 stories tall, its windows long and warm lit, its roof covered in solar panels, its garden full of vegetables planted by children who had once known hunger too intimately. The walls whispered not of charity, but of dignity. On opening day, the front lawn buzzed with laughter. Kids ran through the grass while volunteers handed out boxes of books and warm coats. A brass plaque by the gate read, "Opportunity is not given, it is fought for and shared." Gregory stood near the podium, dressed in a wool coat, scarf knotted at his throat. He looked older now, but fuller, like a tree finally in bloom after surviving frost after frost. The 5 boys stood at his side. No longer strangers, no longer survivors. Now they were builders. As cameras flashed and murmurs died down, he took the mic and spoke. "I used to believe that time was something you could buy, steal even. But time never belonged to me. What I did have was a second chance, and I owe that to 5 boys who the world had written off. They taught me how to live, and now we give that back to every child whose story hasn't been written yet. A ripple of applause swelled into thunder. Later that night, back in the penthouse, Noel approached Gregory with an envelope, plain, unmarked, but trembling slightly in his hand. Inside, the blood panel results, the final scan. Gregory unfolded it slowly. His eyes skimmed the lines, then paused, then read again. A long, stunned silence. "Clear," Noel whispered. Gregory closed his eyes, exhaled. A single tear welled, but never fell. The 5 of them stood around him, waiting. Micah broke the stillness. "So? What do we do now?" Gregory smiled, not with the brittle edge of a man pretending to be wise, but with the anchored grace of someone who had truly come through the fire. He looked at each of them, then toward the vast cityscape glittering beneath the window. "Now," he said, "we go find the next 5." And behind them, the fire crackled gently, steady, alive, unafraid. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.